When I saw the silver Mercedes parked across my driveway, trapping my truck in like a polished steel wall, I knew exactly who it belonged to. Beverly Whitmore, the HOA vice president, queen of passive-aggressive emails and unwanted landscaping citations. I'm Everett Rains, a 42-year-old welder with no patience for power-tripping suburban dictators. I moved into this neighborhood 3 years ago after saving up for a place with a decent garage and a yard big enough for my dog Jasper. I didn't sign up for weekly letters about my non-regulation mailbox color or having to explain to a grown woman why my American flag was too large for the aesthetic. But this, blocking my driveway, that was a new low. I stood in my front yard, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, staring at her car like it had personally insulted me. Jasper paced next to me, tail twitching. It was 7 in the morning and I was already late for work because of this nonsense. I called the non-emergency line after snapping pictures of the car license plate, placement, timestamp. Private property obstruction, I told the dispatcher. Not the first time she's harassed me either. An officer came by within 20 minutes. He sighed when he saw the Mercedes. "Let me guess," he said, eyeing the HOA decal on her windshield. "Beverly Whitmore." I raised an eyebrow. "You know her," he chuckled. "Half my shift does. She once called in a noise complaint on a kid's lemonade stand." After confirming I had the proper signage and that the driveway was clearly marked as private, he nodded. "You're within your rights. You want it towed." 80 miles, I said. He blinked. "Come again. There's a tow yard out near Rosedale, middle of nowhere. They charge extra for long distance, but they don't release without full payment. Let's give her a little field trip." The officer didn't argue, he just grinned and made the call. Tow truck showed up not long after. Watching Beverly's car get hoisted up and taken away was the most satisfying thing I'd seen all week. I even waved goodbye. 2 hours later, the storm hit. I was back from work, covered in grease and grime, when I heard the sharp knock on my front door. I opened it to find Beverly in a leopard print blouse, oversized sunglasses, and a fury that could melt metal. "You had my car towed," she snapped, voice trembling. "You blocked my driveway," I said flatly. "You think you can just park wherever you want?" "That was an HOA-sanctioned placement," she barked. "I was doing an inspection of your property. Your lawn is overgrown by 2 inches. That's a violation." "Try again," I said, holding up the time-stamped photos. "You parked it there at 6:31 in the morning. No clipboard, no inspection vest, just you and your overpriced attitude." She tried to push past me, but Jasper growled low from behind my leg. She froze. "You'll pay for this," she hissed. "The HOA will fine you for unauthorized towing." I leaned against the doorframe. "Funny, I called the police. They cleared it. Got the report number right here." She stormed off, heels clacking against the sidewalk. I watched her march back toward her house only to realize she didn't have her car. She wasn't walking home. She was walking to the HOA clubhouse, and that's when I knew this wasn't over. Beverly wasn't just mad. She was plotting. Saturday morning started with a low hum in the air, nerves, maybe, or maybe it was the city utility truck idling down the block. Either way, I had barely stepped onto my porch with a wrench in hand when I saw a folded notice stuck into my mailbox. No envelope, no stamp, just a single sheet of HOA letterhead paper flapping in the breeze like it had something important to say. I pulled it free and read the first line. "Notice of immediate violation, unauthorized use of emergency services." I read it again to be sure I wasn't hallucinating. They were fining me $500 for abuse of public resources and creating undue hardship for an HOA board member. I let out a low whistle and walked back inside. Jasper barked once, sensing my tension. I dropped the notice on the kitchen table and pulled out my laptop. I'd been keeping notes since the first week. Beverly tried to ticket me for non-conforming tool storage because my welding tanks were visible in my open garage. This wasn't a surprise. It was an escalation. By noon, I had a new folder. Retaliation May. I scanned the letter, attached it to the folder, then clicked on the HOA bylaws PDF I downloaded when I moved in. Section 9, subsection D. Residents may contact emergency services without HOA approval in cases of safety, obstruction, or trespassing. Clear as day, I printed it out, circled the clause, and slid it into a manila folder. I'd learned a long time ago that when someone starts a paper war, you come armed with more paper. I didn't even have time to put the folder away before my neighbor, Dennis, showed up. He was in his late 60s, retired Navy, with a voice like gravel and a walk like he never quite left parade formation. "She just went door to door," he said without preamble, "telling folks you're dangerous and unstable, said you threatened her." My jaw tightened. "You know I didn't," I said. Dennis nodded. "Didn't say I believed her, but she's telling people she's got proof." "Proof of what?" "That you're violating the community safety clause. Said she's calling an emergency board meeting Monday. Wants to push for a forced mediation." I leaned against the doorframe. "She's trying to paint me as a violent threat for having her car towed." "I've seen this before," Dennis said. "They tried it on a guy over on Maple Street. He painted his shutters black instead of slate gray. They got into his finances, found an old tax lien, and tried to force a lien of their own." I narrowed my eyes. "That even legal?" "Not really, but if you don't fight it, it doesn't have to be." I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I reviewed everything I had: photos, police reports, city ordinances. I even looked up the HOA's incorporation status. That's when I found something interesting. The Articles of Association for our HOA hadn't been updated in over 12 years. More importantly, the current board had never filed their officer renewals with the county. Technically, their legal authority was in a gray area. Very gray. On Sunday, I paid a visit to my friend Elena. She worked as a paralegal for a real estate attorney in the city and had helped me with my mortgage paperwork when I bought the place. She scanned the printouts I brought her and raised an eyebrow. "They haven't refiled since 2012, correct? And they're trying to fine you." "Yup." "For calling the cops." She tapped the table thoughtfully. "If they're operating without an active officer filing, they can't enforce anything. Not fines, not liens, nothing. You could take this to small claims and win. Or we file a complaint with the county registrar and the state HOA compliance board. If the board's operating illegally, the county can order a cease and desist on all enforcement actions. That'll freeze everything, not just freeze. If they've collected dues under an expired registration, they could be liable for restitution." That was more than I expected. I left her place with a printed packet ready to file first thing Monday morning, but Beverly wasn't waiting. At 5 p.m. sharp, she showed up again. This time with a clipboard. Two other board members behind her, Gordon and Clarice, both of whom looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "We're here on official HOA business," she said, lifting the clipboard like it was a badge. I stepped onto my porch, arms crossed. "You're trespassing." "Not while conducting board duties. Your board has no legal standing," I said. "You've failed to update your officer filings in over a decade." "I've already filed a notice of violation with the county." She lost her composure for half a second, just long enough for her voice to crack. "You don't have the authority, you lost your authority," I cut in. 12 years ago, every fine you've issued since then, void, every enforcement action." "Fraudulent." Gordon cleared his throat. "Is this true?" She shot him a glare. "Stay out of this." "No," I said, pointing to them both. "You should stay in it. Because if you keep backing her while she impersonates a legal officer of a defunct board, you're complicit. And that has legal consequences." Clarice turned pale. I didn't know, that's why I printed copies," I said, handing them each a packet. "Take these, raid them. Then decide if you want to be part of this crash." Beverly's steering straight into a courtroom. Beverly tried to speak, but her words caught. She turned and stormed off without another word. Gordon and Clarice followed, but not before Gordon gave me a nod, something between an apology and a warning. The next morning, I filed the complaint with the county clerk's office and the state HOA oversight division. I attached every relevant document, including the police report, the expired officer filing, and the violation notice Beverly left in my mailbox. By Wednesday, I received confirmation from the county registrar. The HOA's legal status was officially under investigation. On Friday, a plain sedan pulled into Beverly's driveway. Two men in suits stepped out county compliance officers. I didn't need to eavesdrop. I watched from my garage as they handed her a formal notice of suspension. Her face went sheet white. Her hands trembled as she took the packet. She didn't say a word. Later that afternoon, Dennis walked over with a six-pack and sat on my porch. "They're calling a special election," he said. "County's forcing it. Every homeowner gets one vote, no proxies." "About time," I said. He nodded toward Beverly's house. "She's been pacing all day. Looks like someone just revoked her crown." I glanced down at the folder that started it all. It now held letters from 3 other residents who'd been targeted, one for putting up a basketball hoop, another for planting sunflowers, and the last for refusing to use the HOA's preferred pest control company. One by one, people were coming forward. The neighborhood wasn't hers anymore. It never was. By the following week, the air in the neighborhood had shifted. The constant tension that used to hang like humidity after a storm now felt sharp, expectant. People weren't just watching anymore, they were talking. Not in whispers, but in open driveways, over fences, and across sidewalks. It wasn't just about Beverly anymore. It was about everything her board had done behind the scenes. I'd become something of a reluctant lightning rod. Neighbors I barely knew before, folks who'd spent years keeping their heads down, were now stopping by with copies of letters, screenshots of emails, and even voice recordings. Turns out, Beverly had a habit of leaving voicemails late at night, pressuring residents into voluntary compliance. Her voice was unmistakable, sharp, clipped, and always with a threat just beneath the surface. That Friday, a man named Javier knocked on my door. I recognized him from 2 streets over. He worked nights at the hospital and kept to himself, but his hands were shaking as he handed me a file folder. "I need to show someone this," he said, eyes darting behind him. "I don't know what else to do." Inside were bank statements with monthly HOA dues, only they didn't match the official amounts listed in the community handbook. Every 3rd month, his account had been charged $50 more than the posted rate. Over the course of 4 years, that added up to hundreds. "I called my bank," he said. "They said the charges came from a different merchant ID than the regular ones. Same HOA name, different business registration. I think they're siphoning money." I stared at the documents. This wasn't just overreach anymore. This was fraud. We spent the rest of the afternoon inside my garage, where I kept a small workbench and a printer. With Javier's permission, I scanned everything and cross-referenced the merchant IDs with the state business registry. Sure enough, there were 2 separate entries under nearly identical names. One was the official HOA. The other had been registered by a shell company 6 years ago, address listed as a P.O. box downtown, the registrant, Beverly Whitmore. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. This wasn't just a power trip. This was embezzlement. By the end of the night, I'd compiled a file thick enough to choke a shredder. I drove it straight to the county fraud division the next morning and handed it over at the front desk. The investigator, a woman named Patris, didn't waste time. "She's been operating a duplicate payment system," she said after skimming the first few pages. "That's wire fraud. If we can confirm intent and trace the funds, she's looking at felony charges." Monday morning brought 2 unmarked vehicles to our neighborhood. Not the usual city compliance officers, these were feds. One of them carried a badge from the state's financial crimes unit. They didn't knock. They served. Beverly's door opened halfway before they stepped inside. She didn't scream, didn't argue. She just stood there, frozen, as they handed her the subpoena and requested access to her records. Gordon and Clarice were both called in separately. By noon, word had spread through the entire community. I didn't go outside. I didn't need to. The silence spoke for itself. 2 days later, I was summoned to a town hall meeting, this one organized not by the HOA, but by a temporary committee appointed by the county. It was held in the elementary school gymnasium. Folding chairs, a single microphone, and over 80 homeowners packed into a space built for half that. The committee chair, a woman named Ruth, opened the meeting with a single sentence. Due to ongoing investigations, the former board has been suspended indefinitely. The room erupted, not in applause, something deeper. Relief. Ruth gestured to me from the front row. I hadn't planned on speaking, but she handed me the mic anyway. I stood up, cleared my throat, and looked out at the crowd. I didn't do any of this to get even, I said. I just wanted to be able to pull out of my driveway without someone thinking they own it. I didn't know what Beverly was really doing. But thanks to all of you sharing documents, screenshots, voicemails, we've got a full picture now, and that picture's ugly. I paused. People were leaning forward in their seats. We won't fix this overnight. But we start by electing a board that actually answers to us. No more secret fines, no more threats, no more luxury cars blocking driveways while pretending it's for some inspection. That earned a few scattered laughs. I'm not running for anything, I said. But if you see someone up here who's not afraid to ask questions, vote for them. If you see someone who's never stood up to Beverly, don't. When I sat down, Ruth took the mic back. The county has appointed interim financial oversight. All accounts are frozen pending the investigation. Anyone who's been overcharged will be contacted directly. One man near the back raised his hand. What happens to Beverly if they confirm the fraud? Ruth didn't blink. She'll be prosecuted. The DA's office is already reviewing the evidence. That was the first time I saw people cheer. The next few weeks were strange. Quiet, but not in a bad way, more like the calm after a long hurricane. I spent more time in the garage, finally finishing the welding project I'd been putting off for months. Jasper stopped pacing near the front window. The mailbox didn't cough up threats anymore, just bills and the occasional flyer about food trucks or block parties. One afternoon, as I was replacing a fuel line on my truck, a familiar car rolled past. Beverly's Mercedes. Only this time it wasn't polished. The bumper had a dent. The paint was flaking near the rear fender, and it wasn't Beverly driving. It was a younger man, her son maybe, with a face like he hadn't slept in a week. He didn't look at me as the car turned the corner. I didn't wave. I just went back to my tools. Later that night, I got a call from Patris. She said the DA had enough to move forward. They'd confirmed the second business account had routed nearly $60,000 in misappropriated dues into a private account Beverly opened under a fake consulting LLC. She'd used the money to pay for landscaping, car maintenance, and even a vacation to Cabo. That was enough for charges of grand theft, wire fraud, and falsifying financial documents. No plea deal. Trial date pending. The HOA, as it used to be, was gone. In its place stood a temporary council of 5 homeowners, Dennis among them, tasked with rebuilding trust, rewriting the bylaws, and working with the county to ensure transparency. They even put up a bulletin board near the clubhouse with printed updates and open voting schedules. No more secret meetings. No more unchecked power. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the rooftops, I stood in my driveway with a cold drink in hand. Dennis strolled up with a clipboard, wearing an old ball cap and a grin that hadn't seen daylight in years. "You ever think about running?" he asked. "For what? Board seat?" I shook my head. "I don't do committees," he laughed. "Maybe that's why we need you." I didn't answer, just clinked my bottle against his and watched the neighborhood settle into a peace it hadn't known in years. No more Mercedes in the driveway, no more fake violations. Just people finally breathing easy with both eyes open. The day the indictments came down, everything shifted again, but this time, it wasn't just our neighborhood watching. Local news vans rolled through Oak Ridge for the first time in years, parking outside the old HOA clubhouse and circling like vultures. Reporters knocked on doors, looking for statements. A few neighbors talked. Most didn't. The files I'd turned in had been confirmed. Beverly's double billing scheme had spanned 6 years. Siphoning funds from over 40 households through the fake business account she registered under a defunct consulting name. The charges were serious: wire fraud, grand theft, falsifying legal documents, and criminal impersonation of a public officer. She was arrested at her sister's house in Freeport, trying to destroy a box of old HOA documents in a backyard burn barrel. That part made the papers. The fire department had to be called to put out the blaze, and inside the half-burned box were financial ledgers written by hand, each entry listing names, dates, and bonus dues collected in cash. The DA's office didn't hold back. Beverly was denied bail. Her arraignment hearing was open to the public, and several of us attended. She looked nothing like the woman who used to march through the neighborhood in heels and perfume strong enough to linger for hours. She wore a gray jumpsuit and stared at the floor as the charges were read. Her attorney entered a not guilty plea, but the judge wasn't impressed. A trial date was set for 3 months out. That week, the interim counsel took another step: a full audit of the HOA's financial history. The results rocked the remaining foundation of her regime. Over $70,000 in unaccounted payments, most of it disguised through maintenance contracts that didn't exist. The landscaper listed on the invoices. A company dissolved 4 years ago. The pest control firm registered to a P.O. box in Nevada with no operating license in the state. It was a house of cards, and every breeze from the investigation brought more of it down. During one of the evening meetings at the school gym, Ruth stood at the front with a clipboard in one hand and a thick binder in the other. She looked tired but resolved. Every homeowner in this room has either been overcharged, misled, or flat out lied to, she said. We've filed a joint petition with the county to dissolve the HOA entirely and replace it with a voluntary neighborhood association, one with no enforcement powers, no fines, no secret fees. Just transparency. No one objected, not a single person. I walked home that night with Dennis. He didn't speak until we reached his yard. She fooled a lot of people for a long time, he said, but you were the first one who didn't blink. I was just tired of being pushed around, I said. Didn't expect it to go this far. He stopped walking and looked at me. You didn't expect it, but you handled it. That matters. The following week, something unexpected showed up in my mailbox again, but this time it wasn't a threat or a fine. It was a letter from the district attorney's office. Inside was a formal acknowledgement of my contributions to the case, with a copy of the court's preliminary findings. Beverly was facing up to 15 years. They had already seized both her properties, and the first restitution payments were expected within the year. I didn't keep the letter. I handed it to Ruth to post on the bulletin board. People deserved to see what came of it. As spring rolled in, the neighborhood began to change in ways that weren't dramatic but were deeply felt. Lawns grew a little wilder without fear of a citation. Kids rode bikes past once patrolled corners without having their parents get warning letters. People painted their shutters whatever color they wanted. Someone even put up a small windmill in their front yard, and nobody said a word. Javier, who had first come forward with the payment discrepancies, was nominated to the new advisory board. It wasn't a governing body, just a group of 5 residents who coordinated community events, maintained the park, and kept everyone informed. No power, no fines, just service. One Saturday, I was working on refinishing a wrought iron bench when a woman I hadn't met before approached my driveway. She looked nervous, holding a binder close to her chest. Jasper, now lounging in the sun near my garage, lifted his head but didn't bark. "Are you Everett?" she asked. "Yeah, my name's Lena. I just moved into the house on Sycamore, the one with the red trim. Nice to meet you." She hesitated, glancing down at the binder. I work in municipal planning. I was reading about what happened here, the HOA, the trial, all of it. I've never seen a community bounce back like this. I wiped my hands on a rag and nodded. Took a lot of people standing up. She opened the binder and flipped to a diagram. I've been helping neighborhoods transition from mandatory HOAs to community trusts. Voluntary associations that manage shared spaces but aren't allowed to govern private property. I think Oak Ridge would be a perfect model. I leaned over and looked at the page. You want to help us start one, if you're willing, she said quietly. You've already done the hardest part. I told her I'd bring it up at the next meeting. That night, I sat on my porch with a notebook and started jotting down ideas, things like shared tool libraries, mutual aid systems, and even a neighborhood repair day. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. A month later, the trial began. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. Ruth went, along with 3 others who gave witness statements. The prosecution laid out the evidence. Doctored ledgers, fraudulent bank transfers, and audio recordings from homeowners who'd been threatened. Beverly's defense crumbled by the second day. On the third, she changed her plea guilty. All charges. The judge's sentence was swift. 7 years in state prison with no parole for the first 5, full restitution to all affected residents. Permanent disbarment from any financial or administrative roles in registered organizations. Her properties, both the one in Oak Ridge and the one in Freeport, were sold at auction to begin paying back the stolen funds. The news spread fast. The neighborhood didn't celebrate with banners or parades. Just quiet relief. The kind that settles in your bones and stays. That summer, Oak Ridge held its first community fair. No permits, no board approval, just tables of food, live music from an old speaker system, and laughter that didn't carry the weight of fear. Kids ran through sprinklers. Neighbors shared stories. No one talked about Beverly. I stood near the grill with Dennis, flipping burgers while Jasper chased a frisbee with a pack of kids. Lena had set up a booth with pamphlets about the new community trust, and people were signing up without hesitation. You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't called the tow truck that day? Dennis asked. Every now and then, I said, but I think she was always going to cross a line. She just didn't expect someone to push back. No, I said, handing him a plate. She didn't expect someone to document everything. That night, after the fair wound down and the last of the folding chairs were stacked, I sat on my porch and looked out at the street. Where there had once been tension, there was now calm. Where there had been fear, there was trust. No one ruled Oak Ridge anymore. We all just lived here, together, and Beverly's Mercedes. It never came back.